All right, man, peace. So Richard Sherman, the great cornerback of the Seattle Seahawks, recently ruptured his Achilles tendon, and he's going to miss the remainder of the 2017 season for the Seattle Seahawks. Of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Antonietta, thank you. So clearly, guys, a huge blow for Seattle, who are currently 6-3. Richard Sherman ruptures his Achilles, and also Russell Wilson may have suffered a concussion. Donovan McNabb is now with us. Good morning, Donovan.
Good morning, everyone. How are you?
Excellent. I will start with
Donovan McNabb looking like one of them Philadelphia Muslims out there trying to teach the Quran and also sell crack at the same damn time, allegedly.
Start with you. Is the Seahawks season over now?
I can't say that the season is over. Everything that I've seen from this football team is they're a total football team, and they give you the total package. Now, we will say that from the right side of the football field, he covers it well.
No, sir. I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry. I have to cut in. The Seattle Seahawks season is over, and they were not going to go that far anyway. But when you have a lockdown corner like Richard Sherman was, and now all of a sudden you have to bring in his backup, now quarterbacks can target both sides of the field. It's going to totally change how their safeties play. Because whereas when you have a guy like a Sherman who can pretty much lock his man down, every once in a while he may need a little help on fly routes, in case a receiver gets past him. You could afford to move a lot of your secondary coverage over to the other side to help the other cornerback. Now with Richard Sherman out, they're going to have to take Cam Chancellor out of the box. He's going to have to help in pass coverage. They're done. And they wouldn't go anywhere anyway. All they are was a woke team, a black liberal team that was talking shit all season, and they were going to go out in the first round of the playoffs anyway. But with Richard Sherman, it wouldn't shock me to see them have a hard time making the playoffs. I believe that they still will, because Russell Wilson, to me, is one of the top 10 players in the National Football League. But without Richard Sherman, no, they have no chance. They had Super Bowl aspirations.
Where quarterbacks are completing only 50% of their balls, and they're going to the opposite side. If you ask any former football player or one that truly is embedded in watching football, anytime you have a shutdown corner, the number 2 corner is the one that gets all the reps. And
absolutely.
And usually they seem to kind of have the revolving door because that corner just can't seem to cover or shut down on that side. Now,
at one time, when they first became known as the Legion of Boom, and they first started to get acclaim back in 2012, I believe it was, they had Brandon Brown over there, and he did a good job. It's hard to find 2 great corners. Denver was able to do it. It's very hard to find all 4 DBs that are top notch. So they had 3 out of 4, and then they had a 4th guy who was good, and Brandon Browner. But since he left, they really have not been able to find a guy who's even really been adequate. But you have a guy like a Richard Sherman, who's a future Hall of Famer. And if you check the stats, he's the number 1 corner on the right side in the NFL over the last 6 years since he's come into the league, 6 or 7 years. Even though I do kind of come down a little bit on Richard Sherman in regards to how much the liberal media has promoted him as this super genius, the brother is clearly not a dummy. He is relatively intelligent. He's just not the super genius that they try to make him out to be. And I say that because I've never heard him say anything that was awe-inspiring or revelatory at all. Just my opinion. But I'm not trying to besmirch the brother's intellect. I'm just saying that he is not the person that the super liberal media is making him out to be.
Now it's a total football field, meaning as a quarterback, now it's very balanced. I can go to either side versus the Seattle football team. One thing I will say that with this loss of Richard Sherman, it's a bigger loss than losing Earl Thomas. It's a bigger loss.
Agreed.
Than losing Cam Chancellor in the secondary, because you're talking about shutting down one side of the football field. So for me, when I look at this loss for the Seattle Seahawks, now you start to focus a little bit more on the LA Rams of winning that division and being able to assert themselves as the best team in that division.
We'll see. The Rams still have to learn how to win. This is their first season being good. They're still very precocious. I believe their record right now is 6-2. Seattle still has a victory over them, and they also have experience over them. So even without Richard, they may be able to find it. They may be able to find the gumption, generate the know-how to beat them. They still have to play them in Seattle. They already beat them in LA. So we'll see. We'll find out. Also, Arizona's a team that's not going to die easy. I'm not sure how many more games the Rams have to play them. I'm sure that they have to play them at least one more time, if not twice. So we'll see.
And I will say this, offensively, I'm not pleased from what I'm seeing offensively from the Seattle Seahawks. Russell Wilson seems to be doing a little bit too much.
Well, he has to. They have very little running game, and they have a very poor offensive line. Donovan McNabb, you know that already. If I know that, I'm sure you know that. You're supposed to be the football expert. They've had the worst offensive line in the NFL for the last 2 years.
For this offense to generate some points. They're not scoring a lot of points each and every week, which they're going to struggle going in and out of games, but at least their front seven will be able to apply pressure. There are two key injuries with this football team that I start to look at, and I really wonder how long this will last for the Seattle Seahawks and how far they will go. The Cliff Averill injury is still a major injury that not a lot of people are talking about.
Yes, that is a major injury. Cliff Averill is he's a very, very important factor on that defensive line, along with Michael. My kids, I just want to see my kids. Bennett.
You know that they brought in Dwight Freeney to be able to fill the void a little bit, but Dwight's about 37 years old, and you're asking a lot for him.
Well, I tell you this, Dwight Freeney in spots could still be a very potent pass rusher. That brother gets it done when it comes to the pass rush.
And he's not the same Dwight that we've seen over the years. But now you add the Richard Sherman injury, a lot of questions now go out. They will make the playoffs, but I don't think they go very far.
Look, would it shock me if they don't make the playoffs? No, it wouldn't. I believe that that's a team that's teeter-tottering on implosion anyway. They have too many community activists on their team. These niggas are more worried about where the next protest and where the next march is going to be than when the next practice is going to be. So, I mean, they pretty much been done since that Super Bowl loss to the New England Patriots. That game, they were never the same. And I said that after that game. I said the Seattle Seahawks will never be the same after this game. I said that from back then. Because when you lose a game in that traumatic a fashion, that leaves an indelible imprint on your mind. All right? That type of game, that type of event, you're going to see ESPN do a 30 for 30 on that game in 15 years. And all those guys that were on that team are still going to be mad. They're still going to be mad. They're going to be like, rest in peace, Pete Carroll, but fuck you. Because you cost us our second championship. Dead ass. It's like the difference between, a guy breaking up amicably with his woman as opposed to coming home early from work and catching her getting banged out by the mailman. All right? Those are two whole different events. All right? The second event is going to leave an indelible imprint on his mind. There's a big difference between losing the Super Bowl and losing how they lost. And I give Pete Carroll credit. I give him credit for being able to ingratiate himself enough with that team that they could still stomach him after that.
When you say the season's over, I don't really see, in a funny way, it's a huge injury, but in a funny way, I don't see it changing much in the sense that I thought the ceiling for Seattle was getting to the playoffs and maybe winning a game.
I agree. With Sherman, maybe one game. If they had won the division and they could have hosted a wild card game at home, I could have saw them maybe winning one game. But they're no longer good enough to win on the road, especially without Marshawn.
And I still think they can do that. But is it a big injury? I mean, the whole Legion of Boom is injured. The Legion of Boom, before it became known as the entire defense, you're really talking about the secondary. And Donovan, I respectfully disagree about Sherman being more important than Earl Thomas. We saw what happened last year when Thomas went out. The team.
Yeah, well, wait till you see what happens this year. How could you disagree when you haven't seen it yet? At the end of the day, a shutdown corner is always going to be more important than a great safety. Now, if you're talking about a safety on the level of a Ronnie Lott, then, now you're approaching the type of impact that a safety can have as opposed to a corner. But when you bring in a shutdown corner who could take away half the field, I mean, that totally affects the passing game. I've seen Aaron Rodgers go into Seattle more than once and totally get embarrassed because he did not even have the confidence to throw to Jordy Nelson, his best receiver, because Jordy was being covered by Richard Sherman. So that's the impact that a shutdown corner can have. I've seen it with Darrelle Revis. I've seen it back in the day with Dion to a certain degree. Guys like Champ Bailey, Aeneas Williams. Even nowadays, you have the young kid out there in Jacksonville who's on the come up, Jalen Ramsey. He's starting to have that level of impact. When you have a shutdown corner, I mean, the only thing close is having a great defensive lineman or a phenomenal pass rushing linebacker. I mean, those are the three most important parts of, or most impactful parts of a defense where, they can make bells ring.
The team fell apart, basically. He's a huge, they look like, are they Super Bowl contenders? Earl Thomas went out, done, right? So, Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor, Richard Sherman, I just identified the Legion of Boom by name. They're all hurt. Then you finally bring in a left tackle to spend some resources on your offensive line, which fell apart in that disastrous trade for Jimmy Graham when they got rid of Max Unger. They really haven't been the same since then. You bring in Dwayne Brown, and Brown goes down with an injury. You finally address the offensive line for like a week. He goes down with an injury.
And, just going back to what Kellerman said about Jimmy Graham, they could have gotten a great tight end in the draft. They didn't need to trade for Jimmy Graham. You never want to get rid of your offensive lineman for a tight end. You really don't want to get rid of your offensive lineman for anything. Your offensive line is the most important component of your offense. Really almost of your team. Because when you have a great offensive line, what they do is they elongate drives. They help the defense. Having a great offensive line is like having a great foundation to your house. You can have a beautiful house. If the foundation is not strong, your house is going to collapse.
They can't run the ball. This is a team where, because Russell Wilson is great, because the defense, we'll see if it still can be great. You bring up the Averill injury, too. That's a huge absence, really under-discussed absence.
Well, that's because their defensive line kind of gets poo-pooed. When you talk about the Seattle Seahawks defense, you're mostly talking about the three guys in their defensive backfield. You're talking about Bobby Wagner, and then the guys on the defensive line have always kind of been an afterthought. At the end of the day, the defense that they had back in 2013 when they played the Denver Broncos in the Super Bowl will go down most probably as maybe the most talented defense that has ever made it to a Super Bowl, that's ever won the Super Bowl. Like, they're right there with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, with the Ravens of 2001, with the Chicago Bears of 85. They're right up there with anybody. I mean, to be honest with you, I think they may have had the most gifted and most talented overall defense that one year ever. Particularly with the rules, how they're allowed, with the rules that you have today, where, you can't be as physical with receivers and things of that nature, and they were still that dominant.
But if the defense can kind of hold it together with a great coach and a great quarterback, you can make the playoffs, maybe win a game. But without a running game, with the secondary really compromised, and with Russell Wilson having to do it all by himself, he and Doug Baldwin, who's outstanding, by the way. I know Baldwin's not Julio Jones or Antonio Brown or Odell Beckham Jr., but he's like 1A. He is just about as good as it gets. Those two guys can't do it all by themselves, but they're being forced to. So is their season over? Well, it'll end before the Super Bowl, that's for sure, but it was probably true before the Sherman injury.
Yeah, they were not going to win a Super Bowl anyway. But certain members of the liberal sports media were pushing for them because they provide a lot of storylines. Can you imagine them at Super Bowl week? They would not have even wanted to talk about the game. They would have been trying to talk about starvation over in the Sudan and shit. All them niggas is woke. They'd have been walking around with t-shirts saying equality and all that other silly shit.
Injury.
Well, first of all, I don't know if it was probably true, because anytime you've got the Legion of Boom.
And why do I say that wearing equality t-shirts is silly for, the people who may not understand why I said that? Is because the so-called black man should not be looking for equality. The term equality is basically a hidden way of saying, I need to be validated by you. Right? And we all know who the you is. The you is the so-called white man. When the so-called black man says, I want to be equal to you, he's saying, I want you to validate my existence. That's why I say that. All right? The so-called black man has been taught that the mountaintop, the goal that he should want to reach, is to be viewed as an equal to the Caucasian man. That shows you that he has a self-image problem.
intact and they're experienced and they're healthy, I think they could beat anybody. The fact that Richard Sherman goes down, I'm going to say their season is over because I was measuring them as a Super Bowl contender. I'm not thinking about whether or not they're going to make the playoffs or they're going to win one game. It's about whether or not they're going to really have a legitimate shot at coming out of the NFC conference and representing the NFC in the Super Bowl. I think that ended last night because
yeah, well that been ended, Stephen. That never started. They were not going to beat Philadelphia. They were not going to beat them. I don't know if they could have beat New Orleans in New Orleans. You know, that would have been a very competitive, scrappy game. I don't know if they could have beat New Orleans, but I definitely don't think that they would beat Philadelphia. And Dallas, with all hands on deck, that would be a tough game.
Because basically, like, listen, their secondary hasn't really been the same since Byron Maxwell left. Now, he wasn't that great, but him being opposite of Richard Sherman, along with the Legion of Boom, considering their secondary with Cam Chancellor at the safety spot with Earl Wagner and those boys, there's no question that those guys were big time. Now that Richard Sherman goes down and you...
Well, the problem with Byron Maxwell is he's another one of those guys who was a system corner. He understood their system very well. He knew where he needed to be. He left them for the money, went out to Philadelphia, you know, where they expected him to be a shutdown corner, and he just wasn't that. I'm not even sure if he's in the NFL anymore. I'm sure one of you brothers can enlighten me on that, whether or not he's in the NFL right now.
You don't get to shut off one side of the field. It puts pressure on everybody to cover more ground, and you're already asking them to...
Thank you, sir. I already stated that. When you lose a guy like Richard Sherman, that has an enormous effect on your defense when you have one guy who you know can take the best receiver on the other team out of the game, or at least make it extremely competitive for that other guy to do what he normally does.
Them to do a lot, because offensively, even though Wilson can get it done for you because he's one of the more efficient quarterbacks in the National Football League, particularly when the pressure is on, the reality is their offensive line has been so inept for the most part. Even though it's improved with the acquisition of Dwayne Brown, the bottom line is they've been an inefficient line. It's made their offense inefficient because they don't have a running game, which puts more pressure on Russell Wilson, so the defense keeps you in the game.
I don't know if it's possible to put pressure on Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson loves himself so much that I don't believe that he sees any situation as an adverse situation. Like, you could tell some people, you could just look at them and see, okay, this person loves themselves. And I don't mean in a necessarily unhealthy way. I don't know Russell Wilson. I don't know, maybe he has some issues. That's really not my concern. I can only talk about from what I see. He just seems to have a very, very high level of belief in himself and a very high self-image and self-esteem, which is the reason why he's so successful at a position where everybody will normally count someone out of that stature. I mean, what is he, about 5'10"? They want most quarterbacks in the NFL to be 6'3", 6'2", 6'3", and above. You know, really, I should say between 6'2" and 6'4", 6'5". You know, when you get tall and 6'5", you almost start to get too tall.
The game, while Russell Wilson and those boys nip and tuck at you before ultimately they're able to get something done. Now you're asking the defense to take on more responsibility because the right side of the field is no longer shut off by Richard Sherman because he's out for the season. That puts more onus on Cam Chancellor and everybody else out in that secondary. It's going to compromise their pass rush to some degree because obviously you're going to have to get guys to step back in the coverage, and I think ultimately that just decimates their chances of legitimately.
Yes, and it's also going to hurt their run defense as well. Because as I stated at the start of this video, you're going to have guys like Cam Chancellor who are going to have to help in coverage instead of, you know, being able to come up in the box. So
coming out of the NFC, I think it's over, and it was official last night. The second we learned that Richard Sherman is out for the season.
You know what else is missing without Sherman, Donovan, guys, and Donovan, is that Sherman, even when he's beaten athletically, because he's long, but he's not always the fastest guy on the field, right? There are quicker guys. But Sherman is a very smart, experienced player. And a lot of his effectiveness as a player comes from his outthinking his opponent.
I definitely agree with that. You know, he's an expert when it comes to the logistics on the football field. He's able to make up for and compensate for some of the deficiencies that he may have athletically. You know, he's not a burner. He's not somebody who's going to run a 4.35 or a 4.40. And at this point in his career, he probably runs about a 4.55, somewhere around there. But he makes up for it with his anticipation and with his film study. You can tell that he very, very intently studies his opponent, what they do, what they like to do. And he's able to, due to his studying and his preparedness, he's able to anticipate what his opponent is going to do before they do it and nullify it.
Guessing right based on just having a very high IQ, period, obviously, but football IQ also. And when you take that kind of veteran off of a defense, it can have a tremendous effect.
Well, look, thank you, Stephen A., because you just really made my point when I said that now the playing field becomes balanced. But the reason that I say that it's not over is now because it puts the pressure on Pete Carroll. Being more of a defensive-minded coach, when you know that you have your shutdown corner that's out and you have your powerful two safeties who are healthy at this particular point with Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor, you go more to a zone defense and you allow your front seven to just apply pressure with blitz. And with everything that we've seen over the last couple weeks, when they played against the Washington Redskins, they decided to go man coverage, which was a dumb decision in my part, to go man coverage toward the end of the game, which led to them losing the game at the end. That was only because they knew the right side of the football field would be covered, and that would force you to go left. Well, their starting corner to the left side now got injured in the Arizona game. Now they're rotating guys in that number 2 corner position. It becomes balanced now where defensive coordinators have to go to the zone defense to force you now to work the interior part of the football field. And that plays into the power and really the main part of their football team with Cam Chancellor, Earl Thomas, and Bobby Wagner and their linebacking core, where their front four can just get off the playing field and now get to the quarterback.
Well, that's why Clip Averill, he's going to have to come back as soon as possible because they're going to need him to rush the quarterback. Once again, without Richard Sherman, everybody else is going to have to step their game up. They're going to have to stop worrying so much about all the protesting. If they're sincerely serious about making a run for the championship, they're going to have to really lock in on the football field. Because, when you lose a guy like Richard Sherman, that's, that is akin to losing a Deion Sanders or somebody of that ilk who's able to take away half the field, a Darrelle Revis.
So I will say that it's not officially over with this football team.
No, bro, it's over. It's over. They wasn't winning shit anyway. But it's definitely over now.
And they're not going as far as you expected them to go possibly to the Super Bowl, nor did I expect them to go that far anyway. But I will say that they will get out of the first round because they won't have a bye.
Yeah, but come on, Donovan. This is a team where everybody right now is 29, 30 years old. Getting out the first round will not suffice. Any season where they don't win the championship is a wasted season for them. All right? They're starting to get farther and farther and farther away from their noted goal at the start of every season, which is to win a title. It's not a team of guys who's 22 and 23 years old anymore. Right now, they're in the championship winning stage of their careers. And once they get past 30, the wear and tear on their bodies is going to come to the forefront because these guys play a very physical style of play. Russell Wilson, even though he is a thick, stocky dude, has taken a lot of punishment. And it will start to show on him within the next 3 to 4 years. So they have to get those championships while they still have the opportunity due to their age. I personally think that their time has passed already. If I was the owner of Seattle, I would get rid of a lot of those guys because I think that their time period has mostly passed. Guys like Michael Bennett and a lot of these other guys, they could have a nice day. The only guys to me that I would not consider getting rid of are Russell Wilson and those 3 main stalwarts on the secondary and Bobby Wagner. Everybody else can have a nice day.
The Rams will, but I think they go out of the first round into the second round and end up losing.
I don't know about that. Dewey McDonald, along with Chancellor in your secondary at the safety spots. This kid Griffin at the opposite side of Richard Sherman. I don't know how you're going to replace Richard Sherman.
You're not going to replace Richard Sherman, Stephen A. Why would you ask a question like that? Whenever you have a grade A level corner like Richard Sherman, you cannot replace him.
You got Bobby Wagner out there. There's no doubt about that. Earl Thomas didn't start last night. I just look at this team right now, and I think that the loss of Richard Sherman is devastating. Again.
Of course it's devastating, Stephen A. And really, when you look at this team, you're looking at a team that's on their last legs, as I've already stated. Seattle's a team that, they're like a roller coaster team. Once again, People are going to look back at this team 20 years from now, and they're not going to talk about the championship that they've won as much as the feeling that they should have won more. And you have certain teams like that in every sport, in every generation. You know, people might remember the Atlanta Braves of the 90s. You look at them and you say, how come they didn't win more championships? No, there are certain teams that you look at and you say they should have won more. And the Seattle Seahawks will definitely be considered one of those teams in 20 years. I mean, if this society's still around in 20 years.
Again, because I re-emphasize, it puts more onus on the rest of the defense to cover the rest of the secondary, to cover more ground. You think about it, Donovan, you know this better than me. You don't even have to worry about the right side of the field. If you're the defense, you don't have to worry about Richard Sherman's area. You just get to focus here because he's got that covered. And now you got to worry about that. I think that's devastating for them.
Remember how vocal Sherman was about not liking Thursday night football, right? Remember my proposal to only have it coming off a bye week? Maybe that would help. Richard Sherman now, the guy who complained about the dangers of Thursday night football, season-ending injury.
Max, to that point, how many big-name injuries are we going to have this season, right? Every face of the league pretty much is down at this point. The Legion of Boom is now Mystic.
Look, let me say this. I think that what we're seeing now is the beginning of the end for football. Just being honest. We're going into a time period right now where everybody is super aware of the possible maladies of engaging in a sport like football. We see it under attack by these social engineers who are trying to make it a woke league, which is only going to lead to its eventual destruction. I think that we're looking at the beginning of the end of the NFL, but we'll see.
To combine 23 games since the start of the 2015 season. Coming up, Phil.
But anyway, that was it on the Richard Sherman issue. Hopefully the brother will be back next season healthy. Peace.